Hi, I'm T.Perko from Belgium Nuclear Research Center, and I will present today this our study from the RadoNorm project on behalf of our co-authors, Katriniel Turcanu, Ferdiana Hoti, Melissa Muric, and Professor Peter Thijssen. In the RadoNorm project, we are developing and improving different methods in order to explore human behavior related to radon and norm. And during this evaluation of what it exists out there, what kind of methods do we use to explore the human behavior related to the radiological protection in the exposure situations like radon and norm, we noticed that there are many methodological gaps that we can improve through our project. So measuring radiological risk perception through public opinion surveys, critical reflection on methods. Our challenge was, and the challenge of the radiation protection community, is that many of the risk perception measures employed in surveys where we explore a human behavior are either generic in nature, not capturing any particular effective probabilistic or conceptual dimension of risk, or are focused solely on judgment of probability. So there are many gaps that we can improve, and in RadoNorm we are trying to do this. So our messages for today's presentation for the audience here are three. So methodological approach to investigate radiological risk perception by surveys should be improved. Risk perception as a predictor of human behavior is not unidimensional, and the risk perception has often a limited explanatory value of radiation protection behavior. We would like that after this presentation, you start to think about your methods, you try to improve the methods, you include validated scales to measure risk perception in your questionnaires, and also surveys, you realize that surveys to investigate human behavior should be theory-based. You should include more determinants, not only risk perception, to understand in what kind of cases people protect themselves from radiological risks. So let's first address methodological issues. To improve your surveys, you need to use appropriate sample. Your sample needs to be randomly chosen. It should be also, you should consider appropriate target population. For instance, if you send the questionnaire to all project consortium members, it's not a good target population to claim that you know what is the risk perception or what is the human behavior about the things. You also need to be aware that there is a bias possible included in your questionnaire. You have to control for this bias. Either wording, question orders are really important, answering categories are important. It's really huge difference whether you include in the middle category, I don't know answers and so on. Length of the survey is important. Non-response you also have to control. Then when you assess psychometric properties, this is like risk perception, like societal values like trust and so on. You need to include also and report validity and reliability. You also need to consider that when we investigate human behavior, we need to include we investigate multidimensionality. So these constructs are complex, and we cannot capture mostly with one item only. And please do the pilot test, because through the pilot test you can improve your survey when you go in the field. So we really appeal to you: test, analyze, and also report also this. How did you control for bias? How did you assess psychometric properties? How did you construct the scales? How did you select a sample and so on? And how did you do your pilot test? So let's look only, for instance, on wording, how important this is that you consider this bias in your questionnaire. Here are the results from the SEK-SAN barometer report, which we also conducted in the context of the RadoNorm. And we ask people, how do you perceive the potential risk to your health within the next 20 years from each of the following sources? And then we randomly gave them the different hazards, for instance, natural radiation, food sterilization, medical tests or treatments using ionizing radiation, natural radioactivity gas, radon, recycled norm for buildings, extension of our nuclear reactors, operational time of our nuclear reactors, and the accidents at the chemical installation, accident at the nuclear installation, radioactive waste, climate crisis, malicious use of terrorists, environmental pollution, and large-scale epidemic. And here we ordered them according to the most perceived as the no risk at all to the highest risks. And you can see we framed the radon in 3 different ways: natural radiation, natural occurring radioactive gas radon, and indoor air pollution due to radon. And here you can see how the wording influenced people's perceptions, answers on people's perception. So the wording, how do you frame the items? It's extremely important, and you have to consider these things into your questionnaires. This is only to demonstrate how important this is, but please, when you do the things, also randomization of these risks is important, that you give that you don't put them in exactly the same orders. For instance, if you start with the accident at the nuclear installations and then you have the risk of the ionizing radiation, this can also influence order, also influences and wording and other things that we mentioned before. Then the next message is that radiological risk, that the radiological hazards are perceived differently and are multidimensional. We cannot claim that there is one radiological risk perception. Here is an example of our other study, also the barometer, SEK-SEN barometer from 2011. It has been reported in the Journal of Environmental Radioactivity. We can see we made from different radiological risks, we made a factors, and we got 2 factors that they load really nicely with Cronbach's alpha, which means that these latent constructs are that risk perception of radiological risk is 2-dimensional, and that the one risks, they belong to one construct in mental model of the people, and the other risks, for instance, radiation from mobile phones, natural radiation, and medical X-rays is into another factor. So 2 constructs in it. And then here again, we would like to point out that it's really important that you measure risk perception with more items. For instance, we said that it's not one radiological risk perception, but we have to be specific. So here is an example of the radon risk perception. You cannot just ask what is your perception of radon for the next 20 years, because I will explain this later, they don't explain a lot, but it's much better if you measure it at least with 3 items. Here we measure this risk perception with how likely do you think you will get sick, and how likely do you think that people living in your region will get sick due to indoor radon, and how likely do you think that it's your home has such an indoor radon concentration that you should do something about it. And these items, they have a really nice Cronbach's alpha, and however, we lost quite some people from this, because at the moment that people don't know answer, it also reflects, and people, they fall out from this construct. So please use more items to measure the risk perception of different ionizing radiation exposures. Because also, if you measure it only with 1 item, the explanatory value is much lower than if you measure it with a factor. Here, just to demonstrate, we can show you that the factor, radon risk perception as a factor, explains much more of the radon protection behavior. So radon protection behavior, we measure it also with 3 items, and this is about the willingness to test and remediate the houses of the respondents. And we can see that the radon risk perception as a factor can explain much more of their behavior, correlates much more of than only when we measure risk perception only as 1 factor. So we can say that unidimensional measure of radiological risk may accurately capture one's perception of the severity of the consequences and to discrete emotions that are felt in the response to those potential consequences. However, such measure is not likely to capture the perceived probability of experiencing the outcomes, nor it will be useful to explain the human behavior, radiation protection behavior. So to conclude, when you consider to apply the questionnaires and surveys to investigate people's behavior related to radiological risk exposures, please improve your methods, include validated scales to measure risk perception, and make theory-based questionnaires. In RadoNorm project, Horizon 2020 project, we developed modular survey related to behavior of people in radon and norm exposure situations. And this survey is also available for your use. If you need it, please contact us and we will share this survey with you with a great pleasure. Thank you.